Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the 5 Nordic embassies in Berlin, let me warmly welcome you from our common Felleshus to this webinar to discuss Nordic cooperation in the field of foreign and security policy. Nordic cooperation is a brand. We like to refer to it as the oldest regional partnership in the world. Through our close cooperation, which has grown deep roots in politics, economy and culture, our 5 countries aim at a strong Nordic voice in the world and in European and international fora. Official Nordic cooperation is carried out through the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is also supporting our webinar, as well as the Interparliamentary Nordic Council. The scope of these official forms of Nordic cooperation is wide, varying from culture to digitalization, from education to justice, and from the economy to environment, to name just a few fields. However, there is at least one important field that falls outside of the scope of the official Nordic cooperation formats, foreign and security policy. Here it is also worth noting that, for various historical reasons, the 5 Nordic states have opted for different security and defense affiliations. Notably, 3 are members of NATO and 3 other of the European Union, with only 1, Denmark, belonging to both. This doesn't mean, however, that our countries would not cooperate in foreign and security policy matters. Quite on the contrary, the Nordic countries are some of each other's closest partners of cooperation, also when it comes to these questions, including so-called hard security and defense. This is only natural because we share a common security environment in which the range of security threats has been growing in the last years. By working together based on common interests, we can strengthen our own security and enhance our input to the promotion of global security. Over the past decades, the Nordic countries have collaborated in, for example, peacekeeping and crisis management missions, and worked together to promote human rights. In fact, Nordic foreign, security and defense policy cooperation has even deepened further in the past few years. The Nordic Defence Cooperation, Nordefco, is a good example of the closer cooperation. Nordic foreign and security policy cooperation, also known as N5, is not exclusive. It is complemented by other formats, such as the Nordic Political Cooperation, NB8, which celebrated its 30th anniversary last year. Arctic cooperation is another area where all 5 Nordic countries are active, together with a number of others. The Nordic ministers also regularly meet and interact with other important and often like-minded partners, such as Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, even if Nordic cooperation is well established, it's not static. The Nordic countries are constantly exploring possibilities to work together even more closely. At one of their meetings 2 years ago, the 5 Nordic foreign ministers decided it was time for some fresh ideas and tasked Mr. Björn Bjarnason, former Icelandic cabinet minister, to come up with non-binding proposals on how to develop Nordic cooperation on foreign and security policy further. I shall not go into the details of the report, because next we will have the great opportunity to listen to the author himself. Moreover, after his keynote speech, we can be looking forward to a panel discussion among Nordic and German experts. All of you in the audience will have the possibility to participate in the discussion by posting questions or comments in the chat. Minister Björn Bjarnason, let me thank you for accepting our invitation to share your views and visions on Nordic foreign and security policy cooperation with us. It is a pleasure and honor to have you with us. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be with you here today and to get the opportunity to discuss the proposals put forward in my report on increased Nordic cooperation in the field of foreign affairs and security issues. This report and its proposals are the fruit of my conversations with well over 100 people, like yourselves, over a 6-month working period. Experienced people with serious knowledge of the workings of the international system and deep insight into the practicalities of transforming words into actions. Now, some might argue that with COVID and all the turbulence we are faced with, the Nordics have little bearing on everything that is currently going on in the international system. I would argue quite to the contrary and say that Nordic cooperation has hardly ever been as relevant or as important as it is today. Important not just for the Nordic countries themselves, but also for the liberal West in general. I would also argue that increased great power rivalry, which is not lost on the Nordic region and the Arctic in particular, has pulled the Nordics closer together. And this rivalry is, of course, an inseparable part of the theme that we are focusing on here today, that is to say, hybrid threats and cyber issues, and also closely linked to the other themes of the report, that is climate change and threats to the international world order. In the invitation to this webinar, 2 questions were raised. How to further develop Nordic cooperation in foreign and security policy, and second, do we need a more integrated Nordic approach to tackle global challenges such as hybrid threats and cyber issues? As for the first question, I want to stress how fast Nordic cooperation in the field of foreign and security policy has developed since Thorvald Stoltenberg was tasked to write his report on these issues some 10 years ago. He dealt directly with traditional military issues, and some months after the publication of his report, they became an integral part of Nordic cooperation with NORDEFCO, the Nordic Defense Cooperation. A revolutionary step compared to the situation during the Cold War, when all things military were a taboo in the Nordic Council. Nordic security links are now stronger than ever before. The US is for the first time involved in the defense of all the Nordics. The US Air Force is very visible with its strategic bombers in the north. 3 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers were recently operating from Keflavik, Iceland. The official purpose of stationing the bombers in Iceland was to train aircrew members in the North Atlantic and to demonstrate US commitment to allies and partners. Earlier, US B-1B bombers conducted several training missions in the Arctic region from the Orland Air Force Station in Norway. While this is happening in the Nordic region, the Americans are withdrawing from Afghanistan, and President Biden has indicated a diminished role for the United States as the world's policeman. They would only intervene in the future if there were clear goals and a fundamental national interest for the US. The challenges and strategic developments taking place in the Nordic region due to climate change make it vital that the US remains engaged in maintaining necessary balance in the region. The Nordics have more leverage together and thus generate greater impact when they are acting together. Their collective credibility and strength in areas such as climate change, conflict prevention, peace meditation, and gender equality provide ample opportunities for increased Nordic diplomatic and practical cooperation. The Nordics should formulate a common strategy for the collective strengthening of networks to successfully reform multinational institutions. With an administration in Washington interested in using peaceful means and wanting to strengthen Western influence through traditional international organizations, constructive Nordic proposals to reshape the rules-based world order will be well received. This is my answer to the first question. Discussing hybrid threats and cyber issues, I want to point out that the complexities and the analytical capabilities needed to build and maintain resilience against hybrid threats and cyber attacks and to counter them are so great that smaller states like the Nordics have everything to gain from pooling resources, experiences, and lessons learned. In fact, we are at a place where we can ill afford not to deepen our relationship in these fields. The benefits of facing these complex threats together greatly outweigh the potential costs. And in fact, leaving one behind to deal with them alone is not an option. If one of the Nordics fails, the reputation of all takes a hit. In my report, there are 4 proposals in the area of hybrid threats and cyber issues. One is for the Nordics to develop greater hybrid situational awareness, working towards a common conceptual and political understanding of the key hybrid threats facing them both individually and collectively. Each country needs to develop its ability to tackle hybrid threats on an individual basis. However, given the complex nature of hybrid threats, so-called whole of society and whole of government approaches are need to be complemented by international cooperation. To develop a common terminology and a common understanding of the threats to each of the Nordics is important. It supports better situational awareness and prepares the ground for common deterrence strategies and eventually ways to effectively disrupt or prevent such threats. The second proposal is to take into consideration positive experiences of some of the Nordics in the field of comprehensive defense to better prepare for future crises. In this regard, it is important to note that during the COVID-19 pandemic, states have seen a great increase in hybrid attacks. We have seen hybrid influencing campaigns, fake news, serious cyber attacks directed towards, for example, hospitals, medical research facilities, universities, and healthcare systems. Last May, a criminal group made a ransom attack to gain entry into the Irish health system, affecting almost every part of the system, already worn down by more than a year of fighting COVID-19. Although it has been almost 4 months since the attack, Ireland Healthcare Service is still feeling the direct and indirect effects. No ransom was paid either by or on behalf of the Irish government. But the Irish police force continues to investigate the attack with the assistance of Europol and Interpol. And the police is also working with the cybersecurity industry, academia, and other law enforcement experts, including the FBI, Canadian police, the UK National Crime Agency, and the United States Secret Service. Examples like these underscore the importance of both internal preparedness and of cooperation between friendly nations. The Nordics should therefore unite in developing a common framework within hybrid and cyber for dealing with future threats such as pandemics, including a common early warning system, integrated planning, and unified Nordic action. Public-private cooperation is highly relevant when promoting a democratic digital future, including common Nordic values for free speech, privacy, free market, and transparency in the digital world. In their effort to promote democratic governance and respect for human rights in cyberspace, the Nordics should actively seek support from like-minded countries and companies. Defense against hybrid threats and hacking is now an integral part of national security. Both civilian and military means, public and private, are needed for this defense. The focus is at present on 5G, but 6G is just around the corner, and it is high time for Nordic governments to prepare for more technological changes by consulting on an integrated policy, both internally and on a multinational level. Hostile states and non-state actors in cyberspace are multiplying. New technologies will add risks for companies and society. This demands collaboration and knowledge sharing, not only at the national level, but also on the Nordic and international one. The Nordics should engage in a strategic dialogue on new technologies, such as wireless network technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and blockchain technology. Such an initiative would be a good example on how Nordic cooperation can strengthen each country in its response to conflicting diplomatic and political pressures from the great powers. To conclude, the Nordics matter. They matter because they manifest a huge advantage of Western democracy, freedom, and liberalism. They demonstrate the enormous economic and social benefits of equality and the respect for human rights. They underscore the value added of sustainable development and environmental protection. They carry weight because if they fail, the Western world and what it stands for suffers a blow. The Nordics should pool their resources both as a bloc in multinational cooperation and in face of hybrid and cyber threats, not just for their own advantage, but to the advantage of common goals and values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. It is my conviction that enhanced Nordic cooperation is necessary not only for us in the North, but for the continued prosperity of all. Nordic success matters in the big picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for giving us such a broad overview over Nordic cooperation and the results of your report, but also for highlighting some of the aspects that are perhaps lesser known, like the involvement of the United States and the significance for Nordic cooperation. We can come back to this. My name is Robin Allers from the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies, and I have the great pleasure to introduce and moderate a panel of experts that will discuss different aspects of Nordic cooperation in the field of foreign and security policy, and will give their assessment of the opportunities but also challenges for closer Nordic cooperation in these areas. We have three great experts with us to discuss with. We have Dr. Matti Pesu from the Finnish Institute for International Affairs. We have Dr. Kai Olav Lang from the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, SWP. And last but not least, we have Mr. Anders Karlin from the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they will each give a short statement, opening statement, before we get into a more open discussion on different aspects. And you as an audience, as the ambassador has already noted, have the opportunity to join into the debate through your questions and comments in the chat, and we will do our best to relay them to the experts and make them part of our discussion. Why don't we start with you, Matti, in Finland? Matti Pesu is a senior research fellow at the Finnish Institute for International Affairs and has dealt with both Finnish, Northern European and also transatlantic security questions, and will help us to further contextualize Nordic cooperation. The floor is yours, Matti.
Thank you, Robin. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to address this audience about Nordic security cooperation. As Robin just said, my objective today is to offer you perhaps a broader perspective on the evolving Nordic cooperation in foreign security and defense policy. More specifically, I'll deal with the fundamental drivers of collaboration between the Nordic countries, and particularly in the matters of hard security and security policy. My main argument is that both domestic and international factors have never been disfavorable for Nordic cooperation in national security, broadly understood. Today, the Nordic states not only share their main threat perceptions, but also their security doctrines are more compatible than ever. In addition to these factors, there are several other drivers drawing the Nordics together. But however, in this event, I'll concentrate on both threat perceptions and security doctrines, because these variables have historically been decisive factors determining the course of Nordic security cooperation for good and bad. In the post-Cold War world, we've witnessed a steady evolution of Nordic cooperation, especially in defense. The eruption of the conflict in Ukraine, however, marked a major watershed for Nordic collaboration, as it brought about notable convergence of threat perceptions and also further alignment of the Nordic security doctrines. And I'll start with threat perceptions. Especially since 2014, Russia has been the predominant security concern for the Nordic states. Having said that, the degree of concern naturally varies across the region quite considerably. In fact, for the countries in Fennoscandia, namely Finland, Sweden, and Norway, Russia is an immediate defense concern, and currently Nordic defense cooperation in its many formats is addressing this very challenge and is generating conditions for crisis and conflict time cooperation even. However, importantly, the Russia challenge is not only limited to hardcore defense issues. Rather, Moscow uses hybrid means to promote its interests and to undermine the West, and which these hybrid actions have become a major concern that the Nordics must address. In addition to Russia, there are two additional factors in the global threat landscape that are drawing the Nordics together. First, the COVID-19 pandemic. It has underlined the significance of civil preparedness and security of supply, for example. And then secondly, China is becoming increasingly a national security issue in the Nordics, necessitating more intensive collaboration. Then some words about doctrinal issues. During the Cold War, Finland and Sweden pursued their respective policies on neutrality. And as Mr. Bjarnason said, that this meant that security issues could not really be addressed among the Nordic five, out of which three were members of NATO. Today, however, Finland and Sweden have no such reservations, and their differences in basic the differences in basic security solution among the Nordic states no longer hinder Nordic cooperation. Rather, there is a very strong elite level and public support and even demand for Nordic national security collaboration. And here the report authored by Björn Bjarnason is an ambitious attempt and latest attempt to broaden the scope of cooperation. Just to conclude, I hopefully left an impression that I'm optimistic about the future of Nordic security cooperation. That is indeed the case. There are nonetheless certain problems to be solved in the future, but perhaps I touch on them in the discussion. Thank you all.
Excellent, thank you, Matti. And our next speaker is Kai Olaf Lang from the SWP. He is an expert on EU enlargement, has worked a lot on Central Europe, and but he has also focused on, among others, the Baltic Sea area and its place in the European wider security order. And given that we are in a Nordic setting here, with a lot of people in the audience, I assume, who work on German-Nordic relations and are pretty preoccupied how each sees the other. He might also convey us a sense of how the Nordic countries and their cooperations are perceived from a German point of view. Dr. Lang, are you here? Yes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Minister Bjarnason. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share a couple of observations with you concerning, I would say, the perception in Germany of Nordic security cooperation. And here I would say we have a traditional way of perception, which is changing. This traditional way of looking at the Norden has been as regarding this as a region of stability and peace, a region where we have countries which are security producers, even on a global level. In the UN, when it comes to North-South issues. And of course, I think Germany had also, in Germany, those who look to the north were always aware, and this was mentioned by Mr. Bjarnason, that security traditionally, and especially the hard end of security, defense matters, were not part of Nordic cooperation. So in a way, traditionally, from a German, and I would say from a Central European point of view, the North has been seen as a region of strategic calmness. And this is changing now. And I would say there is a rising awareness that there is a growing securitization in Northern Europe. And I think there are three factors. There's the interplay of three factors which play a role here. Most of them were already mentioned, also by Matti. So the new challenges arising, the competition of great powers, restive Russia, the emergence of China as a player in the region, but also the uncertainties about transatlantic relations, about the cohesion of NATO in the last, not only in the years of the Trump era. And at the same time, the emergence of new forms of threats, the hybrid threats. Plus, I would say the fact that the peripheries of the North are real potential areas of instability, like of course Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Belarus, but also the High North. And I think we also are witnessing that what I call the geopolitics of infrastructures and the geoeconomics of infrastructures play an enormous role in the broader region. So these are the new challenges. At the same time, I think many in Germany have noticed that there are new efforts. I think the so-called Stoltenberg report was a first signal of that. And of course, the launch of NORDEFCO, but also, and maybe that's not so much in a broader awareness, but I consider this an important milestone even in Northern European cooperation, the solidarity declaration of the foreign ministers from 2011, plus a couple of regional formats of cooperation, like the Nordic Baltic 8, which was already mentioned, but also bilateral efforts like Swedish Finnish cooperation, and of course the new partnerships which Sweden and Finland are developing in their cooperation with NATO. And I think the third factor which plays a role in what has been called the Nordic turn and the new securitization in the region is, of course, the perseverance of an old heterogeneity. So, and also already this was mentioned, we have this different institutional affiliations when it comes to EU and NATO. I would say, of course, the differences in status remain, but they have not prevented an ever closer cooperation of Northern European countries in the realm of security. I am not sure, but we can discuss that, if there is a real convergence of threat perception. I think in many areas, when it comes to soft issues, when it comes to hybrid, yes, but there might be some palpable differences when it comes to the assessment. If you look, for example, at energy security and look at the Nord Stream 2 development. To conclude, just three, and this refers a little bit to the report. On my part, three proposals for cooperation in the region, including Germany. First, I think it would be useful to have something like I would call it a German Nordic structured security exchange. That might be something like NORDEFCO plus Germany, sort of format where officials, or as a track 2 endeavor, officials plus experts discuss the geostrategic situation of the region, but also questions like hybrid scenarios, the defensibility or EU-NATO relations. Second, I think the Nordic countries should continue in creating networks of understanding, trust, and expertise, especially when it comes to hybrid threats. And the report is very much devoted to this question. The report says there are lines of communication between the ministries of defense when it comes to hybrid, and it should be, the foreign ministries should include it. That's very, very apt. I would say there should even be such lines of communication between the line ministries, because they're also, many of them are very highly relevant. And I would say try to also, at least selectively, involve others from Germany, from the Baltic states, from the Baltic Sea region into these networks. And finally, the third idea or proposal would be, maybe you could become a pilot region for reinforced cooperation in hybrid areas. And it would make sense to define. I use a term which comes from the EU, basically, or from the EU's common security and defense policy. You could define headline goals for resilience and hybrid, the hybrid sphere, when it comes to community building, when it comes to the robustness of critical infrastructures or cyber resilience. Maybe you could even think about updating the earlier mentioned Nordic Solidarity Declaration, for example, at the Prime Minister's level, which would be a very strong signal. Last sentence, these proposals on my part they intend to show one thing which I think is very important. It has been said that, of course, the transatlantic link and the US presence play a key role for the security of the region, for those in NATO and for those not in NATO. But I think there is also a second leg, and that's the EU security and defense cooperation. So I think it's important to also strengthen this leg of security, and Nordic-German collaborative efforts here might play a more important role than they did so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai-Olav. A lot of food for thought here and very concrete proposals that I'm sure we have to come back to. Before we do that, I want to introduce our last speaker. This is Mr. Anders Karlin from the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he's heading the section for hybrid threats, cyber and new technology. So we could hardly have had a better experts to comment on some of the key issues in the Bjarnason report. But I learned that you also had a long career where you worked on EU and NATO issues. So you might also help us to get a feeling how Nordic cooperation on these issues, national cooperation on these issues is linked to similar efforts on the wider European and transatlantic levels, either now or later in the discussion. But now the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks to Finland for organizing this event in Berlin, and also to Mr. Bjarnason for his presentation, but also for his very ambitious report, which we have read and studied. I think I will speak a little bit about cyber and hybrid in general, because we tend to talk about these things without really defining what we talk about. So, and then of course we'll speak a little bit about Nordic cooperation as well. But first, some three initial reflections on the first issue. What are we talking about? From where I sit in my division, we tend to talk about, of course, everything when we talk about hybrid. We tend to talk about everything that is not purely military and that is not purely police is hybrid. But of course, when we work with these issues, we'll have to have some more focus. So we are basically focusing on peacetime, non-military threats, which are initiated, controlled, and executed with an antagonist purpose primarily from state actors. So it's rather confining what we talk about. And our focus is on 4 distinct policy areas. It's on situational awareness, it's on resilience, and that is, of course, primarily on the national level. It's on posture or preparedness. Some states prefer to say deterrence, but it's basically our preparedness to meet threats. And finally, political or diplomatic countermeasures. So these are the 4 areas which we focus on, which is all, and they are also relevant in the Nordic context. And I will also say what is our main task, I think, when talking about these issues, and also in the Nordic context, from the perspective of the MFA, it's to have oversight, because it's such a complex network of things going on in different corners. So basically our job is to connect the dots, to see the whole picture. And there are many different actors involved on the national level, on agency level, on international level. But from the MFA perspective, I think the strategic oversight is the most important thing to be able to understand what's going on and to interpret what's going on. There are challenges, of course, working with cyber and hybrid, and these are also challenges that apply to the Nordic cooperation. And I will go into the opportunities for Nordic cooperation, but first a few words on the main challenges, which I think defines international cooperation on these issues. The first challenge is, of course, it's transboundary. So very few hybrid or cyber or hybrid threats can be met on a national level. They are generally transboundary. So it will require international policy. It will require foreign and security policy to deal with. You cannot deal with it primarily on the national level or only on the national level. They are not compartmentalized, which means that you have to have a whole of government approach, which means that the constituencies traditionally working with security policy are of course involved, but there are many other constituencies as well. It's like the culture, education departments, etc., research. So there are many constituencies which are not sort of in the security bubble or have not been so far, which have to be included, and that's a challenge for in every system. And a third, of course, main challenge is that it's very much private sector. It's not only state, it's private sector to a large extent, much larger than we would at this stage recognize, I think. Much of the things going on is connected to the private sector. And the fourth one is, of course, complexity itself. That is so fast moving due to technology. So everything is happening. Technology is moving very rapidly, and that means also that the threat situation is moving fast, and we have difficulties sort of keeping to understand what's going on and to respond. On the opportunities for Nordic cooperation, I have some general remarks and then I have some specific ones linked to the Bjarnason report. Generally, I think, of course, there are very good reasons for closer cooperation between the Nordics on cyber and hybrid issues. Obvious ones, of course. And I will make sort of an overview of the general reasons why this is the case. On situational awareness, I got the question on the conversion of threat perceptions, but I think that the threats that we face in the Nordic countries are often transnational and regional, and very, very often we are hit by them simultaneously, or we face the same kind of threats and challenges to a very large extent. On resilience, of course, even though the structures of the Nordic countries may differ a little bit in terms of administration, bureaucracy, etc., culture to some extent, there are very, of course, big similarities if you compare with other states. If you want to have international cooperation on resilience, it's much lower threshold when you go to the other Nordics, because we have similar systems and an understanding of how our national structures work, which are rather similar. On preparedness, I think that the Nordics share an emphasis on international law and principles. We are small countries, of course, and we have, I think, maybe not using the word deterrence, but we have a similar outlook on preparedness. On diplomatic countermeasures, I think we are very much into going multilateral, to work through the EU, to work through NATO when responding, all of us, and to have, of course, close coordination on transatlantic coordination as well, all of us. And there are some additional aspects. I think that the most important one is probably that we are tech democracies. We are the growing importance of economic and technological capabilities in security policy, of course, is obvious, and we have a strong position. We have a brand, and we have, if you take our stance on the other big issue, our solid democracy, that's that's something to build on. We are tech democracies, and of course the other leg is that the growing importance of values and principles, also looking at the global situation where you have conflict between US and China, etc., and Russia. It's very much linked to values and principles, and we have a very common understanding and are very comfortable with each other in that regard. And of course, I will also comment a little bit on the different security choices that we have made in the past. Of course, I've been working with that a lot, so I know everything about that. We are not members of NATO, and Finland is not a member of NATO, but of course we are close partners nowadays. I think that the non-military security issues may make different organizational belongings, EU or NATO, even less significant, and maybe even serve as an advantage in areas where the division of labor between EU and NATO will have to be more dynamic in the future and pragmatic in the future. And of course, the Nordics, they have shown great sort of pragmatism in the relation to these organizations and how we work with them. Finland and Sweden in relation to NATO, and Norway and Iceland in relation to EU. So this is these are things to build on. On the Bjarnason report, we have looked at some specific issues. I will not dwell on that, but I noted communication, secure communications is one thing we look at between the MFAs, first of all. And that is linked to another bigger issue, the coordination on joint responses and actions in relation to cyber attacks and countries' requests for support and attribution, etc. So we're working with that already, but it's very clear that we do that already, but we can do it even more and even more effectively. One other area is the cross-cutting complex technology issues like 5G. Investment screening, where we have similar challenges. We have, of course, industrial interest, export, etc., economic interests, and security interests, which are rather similar. So there is scope for cooperation there, and I think that also picking up on what my previous speaker said on cooperation with Germany, that is, of course, an area where the Nordics could cooperate with Germany. And then, of course, we have the UN and all the multilateral organizations where we have already making joint statements all the time, the Nordics. So we have done so twice this year, I think, on cyber issues in UN. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Anders, for not only giving us a clearer picture of what we're talking about when we talk about hybrid threats and cyber, but also taking us into some of the details of cooperation and national and multinational measures that are taking place and how you are approaching this. I haven't seen so far any questions in the chat, but I encourage you in the audience to give us some questions of what you're interested in while you're typing. Perhaps I want to invite the speakers to reflect a little bit on one term that has been mentioned by the ambassador, by Mr. Bjarnason, again now by Anders, and this is the question of a Nordic brand. We have a Nordic brand, and this has also implicitly been mentioned by other speakers. And the question would be: has this brand evolved? Is this are we seeing a different way of looking at the Nordic countries? I think Kai Olaf has commented on this. And is this like-mindedness, this also kind of, this brand is perhaps building on also a platform where we can, as one of the proposals by Kai Olaf Lang, is a platform to reach out to other like-minded countries. Can we widen the brand to the Baltic countries, to other neighboring countries? Is there opportunity? Is it useful to see this in a broader context? And we can perhaps later work us through the proposals by Kai-Olaf Lang, but one of them is very similar to what we perhaps have with the Northern Group already, but where it has been tried to see the region in a broader context. But the question is, the Nordic brand, has it evolved? Is it a basis also for cooperation with other like-minded countries like Germany? Perhaps Matti, if you would start.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I'd say that during the Cold War there was a rather clear Nordic brand. It had to do with the social systems, welfare states, as kind of a third way between the capitalist West and the socialist countries, and there were sort of other elements in the identity as well, sort of active international role, mediation, and so on. But I felt that I feel that perhaps after the Cold War, the identity lost some of its appeal, not necessarily internationally, but in the Nordic region. Finland and Sweden became EU members, and at least from the Finns adopted a sort of a European identity, and the EU suddenly became the most important international forum perhaps at the expense of Nordic cooperation and Nordic identity. So I'd say that now, when we're again when the international order and environment is changing, so there is a perhaps demand or a chance to reinvent the Nordic identity, but what will it be? What would its elements be? I don't really know. Perhaps again, of course, the welfare states and the Nordic model still has appeal, offering best practices globally. You name it. There are many possible elements and options, but very hard to crystallize, I'd say.
Kai-Olaf, you mentioned the prospect of the Nordic region as a pilot region. This could be the platform for concrete proposals. Also, some of them, like Anders talked about, is the Nordic brand perceived as such? Has it kind of become broader, more fluent? You also mentioned the possible connection to other formats, which is there. I mean, the Nordic countries are multilateral. So how strong is the argument to deepen Nordic cooperation, to evolve the brand and to develop on certain aspects of foreign security policy, to deepen the cooperation there? Or shouldn't we rather think, no, I mean, we're part of Europe, we're part of the transatlantic European security community. So what's the point with the Nordic brand from your perspective?
Yeah, important question. I think the times of having one overarching label or brand are over, and I think it's a more complex and multifaceted situation nowadays. Matti mentioned the welfare state image, and I remember the debates when Denmark was the promoter of the transition to the workfare, to workfare or let's say flexicurity, kind of sort of fundamental reform, and so then we witnessed it that things are differentiating. But I would say, of course, that's still there, but I think there are 2 or 3 other elements in this new multifaceted situation. I think it's certainly innovation and research. It's certainly the the ability to have wealth and be climate friendly at the same time, which is something many countries dream of, and I think the feeling is that the Nordics might make it. And when it comes to international affairs, I would say the Nordic countries are the standard bearers of a normative approach. I know that there are also some who in some situations act in a pragmatic way, but overall I would say the emphasis of values in the European Union, but also in the global area, and kind of multilateralism, human rights and things like that. That's certainly part of this image. Allow me two or three other clarifications. I did not mean to say the Nordic cooperation should be widened. I mean, I'm a humble person. I would be very cautious I'm very cautious to give you advice in any way. But I think this Nordic cooperation is complex. So to bring in others increases complexity. So that's why I say let's do it in a selective way, here and there, and not in a broader way. But all in all, I think it's a sort of again multiple picture, where we have a sort of the Nordic 5 cooperation is the hard core, and this is complemented by Nordic Baltic 8, by EPINE with the Americans, by other regional formats. And I think there is space for a specific Nordic 5 and Germany format. One word on resilience. I think there is one comparative advantage of the Nordic states in improving resilience. The trust, I think the trust of societies in their elites, in the state, in the political administrative system is relatively high. Also in the Nordic states, of course, we have populist movements and so on and so forth. But as compared to other societies, it's in a relatively good shape. On the other hand, you are particularly open societies, which again, kind of, I think, increases the vulnerability to some extent. Yes, so that just I will stop here.
Thanks. Before I give the word to you, Anders, we have received a question which I think ties very nicely in here, and I just read parts of it. And this is given the various bumps on the road to a 5G installation, how can the Nordics prepare their industries to be resilient in the face of potential domination of strategic rivals of the 6G market? What can be done to prepare for tomorrow in technological advancement? And it also refers the question to the Bjarnason report, which suggests a Nordic public-private energy cluster that should identify suitable partner regions internationally with high fossil fuel component. So the question, we can also put it later to Mr. Bjarnason, if there are any particular specific regions the author has in mind. And if there are any initiatives where this ties up, but it goes back in a way to the question: how do you prepare nationally, regionally, in smaller groups? How do we link up to wider networks, other actors?
Well, thank you. It's not an easy question. I think on the Nordic brand first, I think we have a strong Nordic brand. We have been working in the Nordic group for a very long time. You cannot construct a brand in a very short time. But of course, you can emphasize different things in the brand. And of course, as my Finnish colleague said, that in the past maybe it was the kind of social model that was we were famous for that. Certainly in the UN, I think we have a brand, and have had a brand for a long time. Also that we have a significant development cooperation programs, etc. All of us. But I think now in this area, for me, it's very clear that we have this combination of technology, relatively advanced economies, and also open societies which are founded in sort of core values. And I think that links up very neatly with the current security policy environment, where these two areas are sort of connected. So that's certainly something to build on from my perspective if you want to brand the Nordics. And I think that we realize this already. So there's already talk about this, and I think that it's also reflected in the Bjarnason report. On a more specific issue on how to cooperate on some of the future challenges like 6G, and I think that this is, and public-private cooperation, this is I think I will be honest, it's not easy even on the national level. What we are doing now is to have a strategic policy on the national level in relation to these issues, because there are, of course, trade issues, there are security issues, there are other kinds of conditions that you have to factor in. But what we are aiming for is a more strategic outlook on these issues. And my experience is that if you have international cooperation on these issues, it will give energy to the national systems as well. What we are doing right now is to be a little bit more active in relation to the current 6G discussion on O-RAN, for instance. And we have a dialogue, and we will have a dialogue probably with our Finnish neighbors, because we have of course, 2 companies in each of the countries which are have a leading role globally. So that makes us, sort of puts us in a strategic position. We have to look at both trade aspect, but also security aspects. And I believe that we have the issue of semiconductors now on the agenda, which are hitting us rather badly, the car industry, as in Germany, I suppose. And that's another issue where you have room for cooperation. But we have now the challenge at this moment is to bring the key actors together, because there's no fora that is pre-designed for these kinds of strategic cooperation on technology and security and economy. You have to sort of create it. And I think from my perspective, we always, when we talk, start with the Nordics and maybe some core key EU partners like Germany. But that's our core. That's our core. That's where we start, and of course the US. So I would say some of our partners in EU, of course, the Nordics and the US, and it's maybe 6-7 countries that we think about when we talk about these issues. So thank you.
No, I think it's working. Sorry. Great. Before we head on to a slightly different topic, namely more the geopolitical picture, we have one more question on the level of preparedness or the level of resilience in the Nordic countries. Are there different levels of resilience in the Nordic countries, and also interestingly in comparison to Germany, which also brings up the question that some of you have mentioned, that that the way the Nordic way, the Scandinavian way of dealing with preparedness, often under the heading of Totalforsvar, total defense concept, is discussed. But are there similarities? Are there the differences in the level of preparedness among the Nordic states that also are making, or is there not only a like way of thinking that perhaps facilitates cooperation? I don't know, Matti, if you want to comment before also that.
Sure. My understanding is that, well, the total defense concept, or the respective total defense concepts in the Nordic very much develop in the Cold War environment. And when the Cold War ended, it was mainly Finland who sustained its interest in the model and kept developing it more towards what we call a comprehensive security model, where there's a lot of operational and then also strategic cross-authority cooperation, and in Finland the status or the preparedness is relatively good. Interestingly, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a sort of a stress test for the system, and certain perhaps more like strategic level problems have been identified, but then again perhaps more on the more operational level, and then perhaps in the more like defense sector and sort of defense matters, I'd say this system is functioning very well. So this is the Finnish perspective.
Kai Olaf, I often read and hear that Scandinavian total defense concept, comprehensive security concepts are also regarded as a model from Germany, while perhaps there's a completely different way of if you had an eye on this, on the German debate, and how the Nordic countries are viewed in this respect.
For technical reasons, I did not know everything.
Okay. The question was, and perhaps you hear us now. Let's see. Okay. We were talking about preparedness. We were talking about resilience. About
yes, I heard that. Mm-hmm. But the question.
So the question to you would be how you observed if there's a German, particularly German way of thinking it, and how in Germany the Nordic concept of comprehensive security, total defense are often viewed as a model, which is studied, and how this relates to the German way of thinking about this kind of whole of government interaction.
I think the notion as such and the concept as such are only partially compatible with the strategic culture in Germany. I think there is, of course, an awareness that the responses to hybrid threats have to be comprehensive, and I think that would be a term which probably suits better. That we have to involve different branches of government and administration. That's a civil military concept that businesses, even civil society has to be taken into account, but not as a way of involving in a deep way the whole society. I think this is something where we have another strategic, not only strategic culture, but also another relationship towards questions of peace and war. So maybe it seemed much too technocratic in a way, or too segmented. But I would say best practices will be useful, and they might be applied in the kind of government, in the administration. But I doubt a little bit that this concept might be applied in a broader sense, as it has been in at least some Northern European states. I mean, it's an apt model for the Baltic states, right? They have since their independence basically gone in this direction.
Excellent, thank you. I hear we have from time to time some technical issues. I apologize for that. These are the challenges of doing webinars. I hope we are doing good now to approach the last questions. I think, given the time progressing, we should turn our eyes on another topic that has been brought up in the chat, and this is kind of what the geopolitical picture. And Mr. Bjarnason mentioned in his opening words the role of the United States. That is crucial vital, as he said, for all Nordic countries. It is of course vital for Germany and for all other European countries as well. But it's perhaps not so well known what a crucial role the United States is playing also for Nordic cooperation, and what place it has in practical cooperation, like also exercises like the Arctic Challenge, and but also of course as a bilateral security partner for every country. And with it comes a question that has been brought up: what if the United States cares less or a bit less than before about the region? Is this a problem? Is this an invitation to strengthen cooperation with each other, with like-minded neighbors, with the European Union? Your thoughts on this? Perhaps Anders, if you want to start.
I wasn't following due to technical reasons. Maybe could you?
Okay. You hear me now?
Yeah.
I brought up a question about from the audience about the role of the United States for Nordic cooperation, given the key role the United States playing as a security partner, not only for its NATO allies, but also for Sweden, Finland bilaterally, and its growing role as a regional partner to the Nordic countries. And related to this, the question: what happens if the United States turns its attention away? Does this have implications?
Yes, thank you. That's an important question. I think even though Sweden and Finland are not members of NATO, and of course the other Nordics have a very natural close affiliation with the US on security issues, we have had an increasingly close relation with the US. Both, I think I can only speak for Sweden, but maybe I think that Finland would agree also that it's also relevant in their case that the bilateral relation with the US has become increasingly important. So Swedish cooperation with the US is closer than ever, I think, on all security aspects. And so, of course, it's important. And the fact that all the Nordics, I think, are cooperating closely with the US makes it very easy. And it's also very clear that the US sees the Nordics as a natural allies in many aspects, not only in strictly military terms related to NATO, but also on the more general issues. It's clear that when we see in the cyber and hybrid context, when there are like-minded meetings, among the first you have probably the Five Eyes countries, but then among the first will be the Nordics being invited. So, because they are seen as natural partners when the US looks globally on its, especially the current administration and its agenda. So I think that there are good prospects for even closer US cooperation bilaterally but also jointly from the Nordics. I think that one challenge will be, of course, the EU and where it goes. And I think that at least we will have our incoming presidency. We are repeatedly emphasizing the importance of transatlantic cooperation between the EU and US. So that will be a main point during our presidency. And I think that all the Nordics share that goal. On what happens if the US turns away? Well, it is clear, of course, that they have a main priority in terms of threat, which is further away. We are, of course, very concerned that they remain in the region as a security partner. Having said that, it's also clear that the Nordics, if they want to remain partners with US, they will have to also come into the new security areas which are very relevant for the US, including technology and other issues. So, and it's also clear that our strategic relationship with China is an issue which also affects our bilateral relations with the US. So that's clear, and we are sort of more and more, we will be forced more or less to become more and more global in our outlook, I think, the Nordics, especially taking into account the challenge that China poses in many ways. So that's clear. Having said that, also cooperating with China is an interest for, I think, all the Nordics to the extent possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see time is running out, but Matti, this is something you have given a lot of thought on, I think. So if we can have rather brief some thoughts of you, because I also want, if you're still there, bring in Mr. Bjarnason before the end to comment on a bit on what we have been talking about. Matti.
Yeah. Yes, thanks. Yes, as Anders said, indeed, Finland has also intensified its strategic partnership with the US, and paradoxically, the Trump years were bilaterally very good, and there was an unforeseen level of high-level interaction also between the ministers, and bilateral relationship hasn't been this deep. What happens if the US turns away, or if there is a retrenchment? That's not likely at the moment. Europe is becoming a secondary theater in the US thinking, and there will necessarily be adjustments in the transatlantic relationship. I think from a Nordic perspective, I'd say it would be important for the Nordics to also step up. All the countries are rather affluent and afford to do more in defense, and this would be a very important signal that we could send towards the US, that look, we're doing more, and here are the areas where we would like to also cooperate with you, and it seems that the High North and the Arctic actually is gaining more attention in the US, and there's one region that would be a good arena for increased cooperation. But yes, and perhaps like the strategic autonomy debate in Europe, we closely relates to the US commitment and the readjustment of transatlantic relations. So there, I think Nordic cooperation, bilateral and more comprehensive formats actually do serve the broader goal of enhancing European autonomy, but perhaps more on a regional level. But that should be, I think, borne in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, do we have Mr. Bjarnason here with us?
I am here.
There you are. Excellent. We have been talked about so much, and there's so many more threads. You invited us to comment on. We don't have time for this, but I don't want to let you go without one question, and this is on research. In your report, you are arguing strongly for more research on Nordic cooperation, and the leaders of some of the Nordic research institutes have also argued for this and played it to the governments to go down this road. Are you having any signals? This is followed up. Do you have anything concrete in mind? Clusters have been mentioned. Is there in your talks, in writing the report, have there been any suggestions what you could do on more research cooperation?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for this discussion. It has been very interesting. Talking about the Nordic brand, then you should read the introduction to my report where I say that the Nordic brand has been a guiding component of everything that we were doing, because we were at the beginning, people said there is a request for more initiative from the Nordic nations, and the Nordic brand should have something to offer. And the whole idea behind what we did was to try to formulate policies that could be introduced to other nations if they wanted to collaborate with the Nordics. I doubt that any nation has really taken up the proposal on cooperation and research. You know, they have divided the proposals between the governments. Governments are interested in some ideas and they are studying it. I think that you have to promote more the idea of cooperation and research and analysis. I took it up when they were discussing the approach to China and in the Arctic. Then I said, well, look at this as an issue for common analysis and a common Nordic study on China in the Arctic, and then take it up in the framework of climate change. I am convinced, and after the meetings we had, I am convinced that it is necessary to have closer cooperation between the research institutes. And that would really be a groundwork for more common initiatives on the Nordic, under the Nordic brand. So I urge that you should take this up, and one should get some government that wants to be the leader in working on this and getting it through in the diplomatic channels. That is necessary. It was well received. It might be complicated. There are ideas in the report on allocating some money for research and initiatives. And I think that this is really a next step in promoting closer cooperation and Nordic cooperation in the field of security and foreign policy, to have more coordinated research in the field.
Excellent, thank you, and thank you also for the invitation or the encouragement to revisit your report and to read it carefully, which I convey to all of us. And thanks for your comments. As I said, there is so much more we could have talked about. There are some more questions that we weren't able to bring up and bring to the experts here, to bring into our discussion. There are many topics, and I'm sure that we will continue this discussion. But to round up our discussion, we have one more speaker, who is Ms. Rebecca Anna Reichertzer from the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she is heading the section for policy planning. And I'm hoping you will take a lot of insights from this discussion to your policy planning. And we're hoping for some insights from you in rounding up this discussion here. Rebecca, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alan, for giving me the floor. And yes, I was tasked to give some closing remarks for today's Nordic talk. And let me start by saying that this discussion has really been interesting and timely, and it has certainly given me some input and reflections to take with me in my daily work, both with policy planning broadly and with the elaboration of a Danish foreign and security strategy more specifically. So therefore, a big thanks to all the previous speakers for sharing their views and experiences and perspectives on the priorities and challenges for Nordic foreign security policy in 2021. I will try to very briefly touch on some main takeaways from both Mr. Bjarnason's report and the presentation and the fruitful discussion by the panel. So there will be 2 points. First, the report focuses on 3 very relevant overall topics and recent developments, as Mr. Bjarnason also illustrated, only underline the importance of strategic and coordinated approach to these central challenges in this ever-changing world. The strength of the report clearly is, I think, to present concrete proposals for action, and doing so by taking a cross-sectoral approach involving both public and non-state actors. And hereby, it is proposed to translate well-proven Nordic concepts and positions of strength, like the whole of society approach has been named a couple of times, to globally oriented action. In the report, Mr. Bjarnason mentioned the pension funds engagement in green transition, for example, and the panelists have contributed with other concrete proposals as well. So as Mr. Bjarnason said, Nordic cooperation has hardly ever been as relevant and important, and not only for the Nordic countries, but the liberal West in general. Secondly, in their discussion, the panelists focused on the security and defense policy challenges and opportunities for a strengthened Nordic cooperation. The point of departure was the fact that the Nordic cooperation, in fact, has been deepened quite significantly in the last decades, and especially since the Stoltenberg report and the creation of Nordefco. In this period, we heard the perception of the Nordic countries as a region of strategic calmness has changed, not least due to growing securitization of the region, facing new challenges like instability in the immediate neighborhood. Belarus and the Arctic have been mentioned a couple of times. In addition, the point has been made that the Nordics' threat perception and security doctrines are, although certainly not being the same, more converging than ever. And not least the typical Nordic pragmatic approach facilitates further cooperation with key international players, namely NATO and the EU. The panelists agreed that it will be key for the Nordics to base a more deepened cooperation on their strength positions and the strong Nordic brand, like the trust in societies, the open tech democracies, and the aforementioned whole of society approach, and to make sure to cooperate with other like-minded actors in different fora, like the Nordic-Baltic cooperation or with Germany. And not least in a time of shifting geopolitical picture with a potentially changing role of the US in and with the region. I do not want to conclude, however, without addressing some of the challenges for a strengthened joint Nordic approach to foreign and security policy as well. Why, you might ask, and because no doubt do both our analysis and our goals in regard to the challenges identified converge. And in the big picture, we do to a very large extent share a common point of departure, and on top of that, we have strong institutional and personal relations at hand to promote Nordic foreign and security policy. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact that different political priorities, potentially counter-cyclical domestical agendas, and hence varying political attention for the Nordic dimension of foreign and security policy in all our countries do constitute a real challenge. And that's a challenge in the day-to-day work of furthering a joint Nordic approach. And so you might ask, what's my point here? And I think it's to acknowledge that there oftentimes can be a gap between vision and reality, and that is not always on the very top of our agendas to think about the Nordic dimension of foreign and security policy. And what does it mean? Well, I would claim that continuously acknowledging this challenge is a crucial first step. And then, and this would be my hands-on invitation to all participants today, to make sure that both politicians and policymakers constantly bear the Nordic dimension in mind and translate both the vision and the potential of Nordic foreign and security policy into practice. And I guess with today's conference, we already delivered on namely one proposal of Mr. Bjarnesen's report, number 14, capitalizing on digital communications in organizing conferences. And that's a very good start indeed, I guess. So thank you once again to Mr. Bjarnesen and Ambassador Sippiläinen, and to the three panelists, and of course to Robin Ellis for moderating today's talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And this leaves me to also thank you for closing our seminar, and the organizers, again, the Finnish Embassy, who has invited us to join them here. And I understand this is also a Nordic effort from the whole Felleshus and their collaborators. So thank you very much. And thank you to you in the audience for commenting and asking questions. And if we haven't touched on the questions you were preoccupied with, please stay in touch or get in touch with us to continue the discussion. And with this, I say goodbye from Oslo. Thank you.